It's time to get off the sidelines and get into the fray. My name's Erik Mansur, and I'm the VP of Product Marketing at Crayon, and this is the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast dedicated to all things competitive intelligence. This episode is going to sound a bit different than other editions of the podcast you've probably listened to, mostly because my guest and I have some experience having a performative conversation with one another. His name is August Jackson. He's the Senior Director of Market and Competitive Intelligence at Deltek, and quite frankly, he's a legend in the competitive intelligence industry. I've had the honor and the privilege of co-presenting a seminar on behalf of another industry organization with August this past fall, so he and I have already had a bit of a rapport built up, which I think you're going to hear in this conversation. But today we'll be building that conversation around a topic that's so important for a well-tooled competitive intelligence program, and that's long-term and short-term planning. Specifically, how to plot a set of CI initiatives on a yearly or a quarterly basis. August is smart, he is funny, he is analytical, and we talked about everything CI planning related, including SWOT analyses, stakeholders, KPIs, and even the TV show Fixer Upper. Yes, Fixer Upper. But first, I asked him if planning is something that he's uncomfortable with, or if it's simply just, part of his DNA.
Well, I've always been a big planner, so that's always been my nature. I'm a big fan of David Allen's Getting Things Done. If anybody's familiar with the OmniFocus software, and I'm a diligent, like every week, sit down, do your review every quarter, do kind of my offsite and plan and everything like that. So that's always been my nature. One of the reasons I joined Deltek in particular is because they focus on project-focused organizations. And I thought, now here are people who are going to understand project management. And a lot of people do, but there's still sometimes there's at the cobbler's children have no shoes moments where people are like, oh my God, this thing needs to be done right now. When I joined, there was a lot more of that. And I think people began to see the benefits of programming and planning competitive intelligence, such that now there is a sense of calm around a lot of the projects. Okay, we're going to bring this to you. We're going to evaluate the root cause analysis for what is the issue we're trying to solve, that sort of thing. We're going to take some time to build this out, and we're going to understand that the project is going to take some time. So I would say at this point now, I'm going to give it 60-40. 60% of the stuff that we have is planned out. And a lot of things we do are just on a cadence now. A lot of quarterly readouts for members of the board, quarterly readouts for our sales leadership, those sorts of things. And we still do get a lot of bespoke project requests coming our way as well. And those can sometimes be a little bit more, as the jazz hands indicate, a little bit more like, oh my gosh, we got to do this right now kind of thing.
Well, you mentioned one word that I thought was really fascinating there was a sense of organizational calmness, right? And if there is some level of repetition, to your point, a cadence, that actually breeds calmness. Hey, I know this thing is going to happen tomorrow. I know this thing is going to happen next quarter. How did you, and with your organization in particular, you didn't really, they're already focused on process-focused companies. So they want to instill a sense of calmness in your customers as well. But was there any growing pains with sort of getting the organization to think the same way, but about competitive intelligence?
Absolutely, there was. So organizations of Deltek's size, there was a time, mid-market companies did not have dedicated competitive intelligence functions. And one of the things I'm really excited about for the profession is, particularly SaaS companies, everybody wants a competitive intelligence team. So it feels like a tremendous amount of job security, and the profession is growing as well. So when I came on board, the level of maturity around competition and competitive intelligence was really not there. They were at this very early development stage where they realized they needed a dedicated function, but there was still a little bit of Chicken Little, the sky is falling anytime a competitive development happened. And culturally, one of the things that I really focused on in, let's say, my first year at Deltek was working with stakeholders to give them a perspective on this competitor did this thing, or they made a blog post that contains a lot of FUD about Deltek, and let's sit down and think about what that really means, what likely reactions, if any, that validates or justifies from us. Most often it doesn't validate any sort of action or reaction. And that perspective has now permeated throughout the business. So now rather than seeing a development in the market and thinking like, oh my gosh, we have to do something, there's now this exercise of sitting down, thinking about, okay, what does this mean? What's the reality? Let's really evaluate this. And then let's think about what options are best for us and our customers.
You say sitting down, but it's really like, hey guys, let's slow down, right? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
The whole nature of software startups is we got to move fast and break things. And it seems to me that you're trying to instill this notion of, hey, if we want to be a large, a lifestyle and enterprise company, we have to start thinking slower and more structured and a little bit more methodical with how we react to things, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I was really thrilled in our global kickoff that just took place 2 weeks ago. Our CEO actually used the term intentional in the context of one of his panel sessions that he was having with some external experts that were coming in and talking about the business and the state of business today. And I was really very impressed with his use of the word intentional and his application of what intentionality meant to him, because intentionality in competitive intelligence, in product marketing and business in general, I think is one of the most important qualities to bring to the table.
I feel like with CI planning now, you need to loop other stakeholders into the process, right? I mean, you can't,
absolutely,
this thing just doesn't happen in a vacuum. You mentioned your CEO. Who are some of the other stakeholders? And perhaps it doesn't go all the way to the C-suite, but perhaps it does. Who are some of the key stakeholders you loop in when it comes to planning for a quarter, planning for the year? Again, something you probably just finished. And then when do you loop them in? Do you start with an initial groundwork, a framework, and then bring them in for validation? Or do you, starting from the get-go, hey guys, gals, people, what do you think we need to focus on for the next 3 months? Like when and where and who do you bring in?
Right. I like to bring people in from the get-go. And in some ways you're kind of never done planning and reevaluating and rethinking things, because things come up, things change. As I mentioned before, I'm a planner, but I'm also somebody who likes to go back and look at things as the year, the month, whatever is progressing as well. So in terms of who those stakeholders are, it really runs the gamut. When I came on board, I really endeavored to be very collaborative in terms of how we do competitive intelligence here, and that we would engage people at all levels in all functional units throughout the business. And so I've got a good number of people that are kind of my go-tos for input and insight. And sometimes I'm going to them and explicitly asking for input. And sometimes it's just a matter of listening, observing, reading what they're writing, seeing what their KPIs are, and trying to determine what are the best ways that the market and competitive intelligence team can lean in to help them achieve their goals and objectives as well. So in competitive intelligence roles, at least historically, there's tended to be either a focus on sales enablement and helping the organization win in the business, or there is a function dedicated to helping executives make strategic decisions. And some teams will have both of those. Sometimes the sales enablement will live with product marketing, and the competitive intelligence team is the ivory tower, that sort of thing.
Business strategy.
Yeah, exactly. And I've over the course of my career, I've been in functions that were, that ran the gamut. Here, it really is integrated into one team, which is a challenge in and of itself. And sometimes I wonder if that was the wisest decision, or the best way to pitch my competitive intelligence competencies within this organization, because it comes with its challenges and its trade-offs to try to do both. But usually there is that bifurcation or section, and we haven't done that. So we in terms of who the stakeholders are, we are engaging with the chief sales officer and her VPs and directors, all the sales managers, all the way down sometimes to individual reps, sales engineers, SDRs, because we want those different perspectives. In terms of marketing and product marketing, We're really engaged with the product teams as well. So it really, our partner and our alliances and our product marketplace alliance teams, it really runs the gamut. We're really very highly collaborative, and we're always kind of having those conversations and reinventing the plan on a regular basis as well.
I love this notion,
chaotic, but it's not. Yeah.
But it's not though, right? Because
right.
You make mention of the fact that some companies, and you use the term bifurcate or separate, or there's an air gap between the sales enablement side of competitive intelligence and the business strategy side of competitive intelligence. You guys have bonded it together, and sometimes that can be, to your point, chaotic. But in many ways, from a planning perspective, at least one side knows what the other is doing because the plans are happening at the same time. And you are able to unite towards common goals that affect both business strategy and closing and retaining new business, because the planning is happening concurrently, right? Does that make sense?
It does. Absolutely. Yeah. Where it becomes a challenge is mostly with resourcing. And that's, and the resource limitations is always a factor top of mind for me. Is, we have, so many, units of value and of time and of attention and effort. Where best can we put those on the chessboard to win, particularly in a very crowded and dynamic market? And actually it's more a matter of multiple markets as well, because the different industries that we sell into, we face different competitors. We are in a different competitive position in many of those industries. It's a very different, competitive situation. And just recognizing that trying to do as all of those things, you can you run the risk of spreading yourself very, very thin. And that's something that we're always pushing back against as well.
So you end up sometimes in a horse trading exercise where, hey, how do we go? We've got this many things to do, but only this much people and time and energy that can get it done. How do you assign the weights on the scale to say, oh, well, is it time based? Like, oh, we're aiming towards a round of funding this year. We're angling towards a particular thing. So business strategy needs to take precedence because of the time boxing that has to happen. Or is it, hey, we've got to show sizable growth from a new business perspective because we're hiring 10 new sales guys, sales gals in Q1. So, perhaps another time box. Like, how do you do that horse trading, and who needs to be involved with those decisions? Because at some point, someone's going to get left out in the cold, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really great point. And you're really onto a lot of that methodology. Okay, what is the business trying to achieve this year? And that helps guide where we put some of those chips that we can put on the board to best support the business's objectives for the year ahead. Because of course, the CEO and the E team, they have their goals for 2022 as well, and they've gone through their planning process, and we want to align and support that as best we can. And then the issue of resourcing is really very important. Even teams that are focused on things like sales enablement in very crowded markets, you have to be very careful and pick and choose which competitors you're really going to focus on. So that's really driven, honestly, by a lot of data to understand, okay, who are we coming up against in the market most often on the opportunities that are, either individually or in aggregate going to drive the most revenue, the most margin. And that determines how we focus our attention on competitors in the market today. So it is that mix. And even within the tactical and strategic decisions, each of those buckets, you still have to make the decisions about where you're going to put those priorities.
I think that's a good place to start. If you are, let's get down to CI planning 101, right? A product marketer who may have competitive intelligence as part of their job description. You make mention of this notion of, hey, make sure these things roll up to what the business wants to do within that time frame, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Where else? Then what's the next step, right? So if you've never embarked upon a CI planning exercise, and clearly yourself and Deltek, you're a little bit more advanced. This is 401. This is a senior level course that you're teaching. If you got to go all the way down to the first year students in competitive intelligence planning, once they identify, hey, this is what the company wants to do over the next quarter, the next 2 quarters, the next year, where do they start in terms of a planning process? Getting the right people, getting the right objectives. Like, what is that next first step after ascertaining what the ultimate target, the ultimate shooting star you're aiming for is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really complicated. So even at that 101 level, that's a very complex situation to find yourself in, and to determine, okay, where do I start with this? Because there's multiple handles on that suitcase, and you've got two hands. You can pick it up from two of them. So which of those two are they going to be? I really try to sit down and think about everything I'm going to deliver in terms of enablement over that time. So I'm projecting myself, Erik, into that product marketer's brain and situation and role that you were talking about. So, in a product marketing role where you have competitive intelligence as part of your functional remit, so much of your role in that situation is going to be focused on the tactical of, okay, what is the enablement around being able to market and sell this particular product. There's also going to be a little bit of that strategic angle as well. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Because product marketing, particularly product marketing teams that have that competitive intelligence role, very often they're guiding the product roadmap and that sort of thing. So there is a strategic element as well. So, I don't want to dismiss it and say, oh, you're just doing sales enablement. But looking at really those two pieces of the role and breaking out, what are you going to do in each side of that, and understanding, on the product roadmap front, that might be more informed by what the business is trying to do, maybe a little bit more longer term, a little bit longer time horizon. The sales enablement piece, it's going to be more traditional, more familiar, I think, to a lot of people, and maybe a little bit tactical, shorter time horizons, that sort of thing. Really break down what are you going to do for each side of those, really understanding very deeply what the KPIs for the different stakeholders in each of those situations are going to be, and assessing your own goals based on those KPIs. You and I have had a chance to collaborate on some things in the past, and we've talked about things like KPIs for competitive intelligence. And I really think successful competitive intelligence teams align their key performance indicators with the KPIs of the stakeholders that they're trying to support. What are the things I can do that are measurable, but also contribute to or influence my stakeholders' KPIs and kind of demonstrate that I'm aligned with their success as well. So I would really start with first understanding what's in scope for both parts of that role as the product marketing manager, who also owns a little bit of competitive intelligence. And then thinking about the KPIs of the stakeholders that you serve in each of those kind of mini roles.
So there's a common idiom that's like, don't boil the ocean, right? Like, don't try to bite off more than you can chew. So really the advice there is, as a small product marketing team with competitive intelligence as an additional function, it's start your planning process by separating to your left brain, right brain, understanding that you're going to have some things to do over here, some things to do over there, understand what the deliverables could be, identify the stakeholders and work with them, and then really align towards their KPIs, at least to start, because very soon after, their KPIs can very quickly become your KPIs as a competitive intelligence focused product marketer.
Yes.
That's awesome. So back to KPIs then for a second. As you're embarking upon a planning process, whether it be CI 101 or all the way to your level, the graduate level courses, are you building like basically OKRs or measurable KPIs into the plans? And then, are you having moments where you look back and see how you're progressing towards those KPIs? Is that part of the planning process, is identifying benchmarks and things of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have a very thorough process built around KPIs and balanced scorecard initiatives, where we've combined qualitative and quantitative KPIs together to really evaluate how are we supporting our stakeholders. And we regularly go back and look at those and evaluate ourselves based on those KPIs to see, are we still driving the level of success that we wanted to drive for our stakeholders based on how we're performing here? So it's both a matter of evaluating, okay, are we meeting our own benchmarks? Are we improving on our own measurements? But then also reevaluating what's the relationship of our performance to the stakeholder performance as well. So constantly reevaluating what that means and how we're delivering value inside of the business too.
Talk to me a minute about like a SWOT analysis, right? So it's one of those more brainstorming type of exercises where you get a bunch of stakeholders into the room. And it's one of the brainstorming sessions that I like to lead. Matter of fact, there's a popular video on the internet of my face explaining SWOT analyses. Are there any other type of techniques to sort of get the juices flowing with your stakeholders? Or is there anything, surveys or, what do you do in sort of to get somebody who may not necessarily be a maven of competitive intelligence into the planning mindset?
Oh, that's really exciting. And SWOT is a great place to start. SWOT gets a lot of both love and hate from the business world and from the competitive intelligence.
You should see the comments on that YouTube video. Trust me, there's a lot of love and hate around SWOT. I can imagine. Analysis.
I've never seen this video. I need to go back and look at this because, SWOT is, I can imagine you doing a great job on this. And SWOT is, I love it. I'm just gonna jump to the end and just say I absolutely love it. And maybe I do it a little bit differently. I've definitely grown in my own SWOT methodology over the years. I mean, particularly when you learn the opportunities and threats can very often be the same opportunities and threats are very similar for all of the competitors in a particular industry because they are purely external. They are completely outside of your control. And that's a lot of things, that's one of the things that I think a lot of people who are doing SWOT analysis get wrong. I'm going off totally on a SWOT jag. I promise I'll come back to the main topic in a moment. But we could talk about this for a lot more than a minute because SWOT is really powerful. And we've done some really great brainstorming sessions by looking at, competitor SWOT analysis. And then when you take, the strengths and the opportunities, the strengths and the threats, and you take the different pieces and you mix them together, and then you come up with a course of action. Really exciting brainstorming exercise. SWOT for me is part of something that I call the stack. And it's 3 analytical frameworks that just very quickly can help anybody understand a competitive landscape and really develop different time horizons of insight into what's going to happen in an industry. So SWOT is actually the bottom of the stack. It's where you're trying to understand individual players within a market. At the top of the stack is something called steep analysis. And I've done a Crayon blog post on steep analysis. I think I've done a webinar that might be available somewhere. And this podcast could last for 8 hours if I was really going to talk about steep. At the SCIP conference in Minneapolis, St. Paul in April, I'm actually running a lab on steep analysis. So I'm doing a whole lot of log rolling right here for myself. The steep analysis is a really great framework for understanding the macro environment. It's an acronym. It stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. And it's really an organizing framework to understand the trends and the uncertainties that are impacting a particular macro environment or industry. Really fantastic way to make sense of a huge amount of just an overwhelming amount of information in this framework and then begin to jump off and do some really great analysis like scenario analysis and implications wheel and some other really powerful analytical exercises, but to really come to understand what is this macro environment today and what is it going to look like in a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, those sorts of things. So steep analysis is the top of the stack. And then, with SWOT at the bottom of the stack, in the middle, you have Porter's 5 forces. And Porter's 5 forces is really all about who has power in this particular market or in this particular dynamic. So it evaluates, buyers, sellers, substitutes, and and kind of like the competitive, the intensity of the competition among them. And very quickly you get an idea of, well, is this an industry kind of dominated by a few very large buyers, or is this an industry dominated by a very small number of sellers, but threatened by substitutes, or new market entrants, and those sorts of forces and dynamics and competitive situations. So when you combine the three of these, it's a really powerful way to understand the macro environment, who has power within it, and what are the individual kind of like capabilities and opportunities for every player within it. So hopefully that addressed the original question. I know I've been on quite a jag there, but you mentioned SWOT, Erik, and I was just off to the races because I'm so excited about it.
Well, I think you answered the question, is that, you need to, there's a vast array of stakeholders that you are working with in order to, create a plan for the future. And many of them do not know where to start. So Entree, the third level, is a brainstorming session that many of these, particularly senior stakeholders, have probably been a part of already. SWOT is pretty common. And then you get into different levels where you're asking different questions and you're demanding, the mandate is a different, more analytical answer. So,
yes.
So, the crux of the question is, how do you go about sparking interest and getting the right answer from the right people in order to create a cogent plan that you can all feel happy with? And I think you've answered that perfectly, and probably actually even more analytically than I would have expected, because there's now 3 different layers, the August Jackson method. How frequently do you come up against unwilling participants, right? So which is not necessarily to say that they are being reductive or they're digging their heels in the sand. It's just maybe they don't necessarily see the value in the moment of having a plan of attack. And when you do come up against them, how do you get them over to your side? How do you get them to say, no, we should plan for this. Not everything needs to be, in the moment, immediate, something's gone wrong. We should have a plan of attack, a map to follow. Like, how do you get them over to that mindset?
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's so many different layers into that as well, because, let's just talk about the psychology for a moment here. Erik, I love your framing of the, the reluctant participant. One of the things that anybody doing competitive intelligence, whether you're dedicated, a product marketer, or someone else who has this part-time, one of the things that you always need to be aware of is there's this really interesting dance of desire and fear around competitive intelligence. And so, people know that they need it, they know that they want it, but there's a little bit of the sense of, you're talking about things that are beyond my control, whether it's competitor actions or it's, trends and disruptions within the industry. Well, those things scare me. And you're coming in here and you're talking about them. And so you're scaring me a little bit. And then, another angle on that too, is you're this outside in benchmark, ostensibly an objective benchmark of how I'm doing my job. And so there's a little bit of a personal level, as well as, I don't want you coming in and saying I'm not doing a good job and that sort of thing. So that's always something that you need, anybody doing competitive intelligence needs to be aware of. And it's not about you, it's about that dynamic. And, you can stop shooting the second arrows, as the Buddhists might say, at yourself, to feel bad about that, or to be upset at somebody that they're thinking about things that way, or they're thinking about you that way when you've got good intentions, because it's just all part of the process.
Right. You can't tell somebody to leave their ego at the door, because that's just, right. It can't happen. Right. Freud says there's no such thing. So right. You need to almost embrace it, right? You sort of got to lean into it a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Spot on. Absolutely. You have to embrace that. That's part of the dynamic around this. And so that's a big piece of it. Another piece of it, you heard me go on this very analytical jag. I just had my analyst hat on in a big freaking way. And analysts, are really, really concerned with, the analytical brain is very concerned with the who, what, when, where, why, how. And I think we throw like 15 more questions on top of that too. The executive mindset. So most of the people we're speaking to just want to know the what and the when, so it's a matter of recognizing, that psychological factor that I was talking about, the fear and the desire, but also if you're in this role, and I think product marketers are cut from a very similar cloth here. If you're in this role, most people don't want to see the sausage being made. And we love to show people the sausage being made.
We love it.
So
it's the best.
Yeah. It's, I mean, who doesn't love, great bratwurst or that sort of thing. But most of our stakeholders have no interest in that. So one of the things too, is you have to set aside your propensity to feel like you need to tell the whole story. When you participate in formal national security intelligence training, there's this concept called BLUF, bottom line up front. Get to the point, get to the freaking point, and get that across to your stakeholder right away. Don't take them through the whole story, that sort of thing. And that's something I always have to force myself to do it, because in my heart of hearts, I'm an analyst, and I would love to tell you the whole story of the STEEP and the 5 forces and the SWOT, that sort of thing.
But most product marketers are at their core storytellers. So they want to, they want to have the big O. Henry reveal at the end, right? They don't want the TLDR, too long didn't read, or BLUF, bottom line up front first. They want you to understand how we got there. Check my work, right? And to your point, most stakeholders, to get them over the hump, you got to give them here is the exactly where we want to get to, and you and I are going to embark upon the process to get there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. You have to come right out and Bruce Willis was Kaiser Soze the whole time, and just get it out there, because you're not gonna M. Night Shyamalan them on this. You need to get to the point. I like your O. Henry example, but I want to bring in, and the Shyamalan example. You the big twist at the end, and it's like, no, just give them that up front.
Yeah, and you're not spoiling anything at the end of the day. What it is you're telling somebody the outcome, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's all that matters to them anyways, is outcomes, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the what and maybe the when. Just tell me what we should do and tell me when we should do it is kind of the perspective. So really boiling it down, and getting to that. So those are the two things that I think are most important, is recognizing the psychology, the fear and the desire, and the strange dance that exists there, and it's always going to exist there, and also the fact that you likely want more detail and information to convey it, whether you're an analyst or a storyteller. You've probably got this great journey you're going to take them on in mind, and they just really want to get to the destination.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two first big things. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to have a follow on from the notion of too long didn't read, or BLUF, bottom line up front. So much of that can be reactionary, right? Like it is, I need to know what the point of all of this is first. And that's a snap reaction from the stakeholder itself. And I want to talk about reactionism for a second. How rigid or loose are your plans when they are functionally completed? When you've gotten to the end of the process, do you leave room for the brush fire, for the reactionary thing that has to happen? Do you recognize that, hey, we're going to try to embark upon this by the end of Q1, recognizing that 2 of our competitors might merge, and that might throw everything into flux, right? Do you try to build in a little bit of leeway with your planning just because that something could go awry? Or do you remain rigid because the best way to do things, the best way to have process is down the middle? I'm genuinely curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Great question. And you're bringing to mind the Eisenhower quote, plans are nothing, planning is everything. I think it was Eisenhower, or maybe Yogi Berra or Mark Twain who said that. You never know.
Or Mike Tyson. Everyone's got a plan before they get in the ring, and then they get punched in the face, right?
And they get punched in the face. Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things too that so I remain pretty loose is the TLDR on that, because the planning is important, and then when things do come up, and I do try to leave some slack, and we can talk about slack and work-life balance and those sorts of things, because there's a lot that goes into building some excess and some margin into what you're doing, but with respect to the plans, things come up and you need to pivot. You need to adapt, because your executives and your stakeholders, when those two competitors merge that you're talking about, Erik, they want to know what that means for them. And they want to know, is there something we should do? Is there something we should have done? There's a, because there's a little bit of, hindsight looking at this, like, well, why weren't we in that transaction? Sometimes, stakeholders might have those sorts of thoughts as well. So you do need to be able to adapt. Where the planning is really useful, even as you're throwing the plan out the window, is what you're throwing out the window as well. So, that big, strategic, push, that strategic exercise we're going to do around this particular subsegment of our industry, well, that needs to be pushed back until this fire is out. So that's really useful as well. I mean, I like a great. It's a terrible situation for a parent to be in, but like a great situation would be, the parent who's a really diligent planner, but then their kid falls in the park and breaks their arm, and all of a sudden, oh, this is the most important thing I will be dealing with. Everything else can just go by the wayside until this is addressed, and my kid is safe and feeling better and that sort of thing. So some people might look at that and say, like, well, the planning was useless because this thing happened and it got thrown out the window. But the planning also helps you get back on that horse.
Yes.
And from my perspective, always, anytime those fires emerge, I always feel very empowered to go back to the people to whom I might have made previous commitments and say, like, hey, sorry to do this to you. Got to push it down the road because this big important thing came up. And 99 times out of 100, everybody's on board with that. Yeah, that's important. Let's move those things down. So I do leave. So, getting back to your original question, Erik, I do leave some margin into the plan, and recognize that even somebody who has kind of a project management view of things is probably underestimating how long things take anyway. So usually that margin gets eaten up by administrative trivia, expansion in the scope of the projects, all those sorts of things. So even if that fire drill never happens, usually the margin gets eaten up anyway.
You use the analogy of the kid falling over in the park. I think about it like every episode of the TV show Fixer Upper ever. Like Chip Gaines is always going to find like, oh, there's some horrible plumbing in here. We're going to have to replace everything. Or, hey, the main beam of the house is actually bowing. So, and then the homeowners are like, oh my God, like they can't believe that, a house that was built in the 1960s is going to have some underlying problems once you rip open the walls. Right. And I think my next question is built around that notion of every homeowner on every home renovation show ever is shocked that their perfect dream home actually may have an issue that is going to prevent them from getting the plans done on time and under budget. Do you come up against stakeholders from time to time? And you mentioned this from a moment ago, like, oh, what was the point of the plan when this brush fire happened? Are there others who are like, well, look, there's volatility. We sort of knew this was going to happen. Like, what is the spectrum? Are they more fixer-upper homeowners, or are they more like, okay, well, we knew this was going to happen at some point, so the best laid plans of mice and men, like, we'll resume where we were before?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. First, I really want to just talk about the analogy, because I love those shows. That's my favorite part of, love it or list it, Fixer Upper, everything, where it's just kind of like, well, did you know that your home electrical system is technically made out of spaghetti?
Yeah, exactly. And right before a commercial, and like the camera, like, oh no, absolutely.
Exactly. This is all got to go and be replaced. They had to take things out of the budget. I think most stakeholders are really good at that, and once you've achieved a certain level of executive leadership, you've been around the block enough to know, like, oh, this is just how this goes. And, we need to find a little bit more budget for this, or it's going to take a little bit longer, or maybe we have to scale back, our ambition or the quality on this, or, those sorts of things. I think most people are very, very aware of that, and never, nobody's thrilled or happy about it. But when, and if you, sometimes have to explain the specifics of it, they get the point. One of the things I will say about a competitive intelligence function, I mentioned before that more companies earlier in their life are adding competitive intelligence or dedicated competitive intelligence functions, or maybe they're formalizing that role within product marketing earlier. Very often stakeholders do not understand what is involved in doing competitive intelligence. That I think is the greater challenge I've faced in this role, is sometimes having to talk to stakeholders about what's involved in addressing some of their requirements or their requests, and maybe having to work with them to scale them back or to reorient them. And I usually find if we focus on the root cause, we find multiple ways to address the need, because very often inquiries come to us in the form of, I need you to do X.
Right.
And I always come back and say, okay, let's talk about why you need me to do X.
And not everybody likes that question in response.
No.
They don't want their motivations examined. They would much prefer you say, okay, sure, and then you go off and do the thing, right? And the more effective way of doing business is being more collaborative, and that's what you're trying to do, is be collaborative about a process. I understand what you're looking for in terms of a deliverable, but what is the crux of why you need it? Because perhaps together we can come up with a different and perhaps better solution, right? And not everybody likes to answer those questions, right?
Yeah, you're spot on. It takes a while in a role to develop the sense of accountability, or to present yourself as an accountable person who can ask that question and have that be received with the positive intent that it's intended. Because I know very often when maybe you or I are asked, well, why do you want that? It's really easy to clutch the pearls and be like, well, who are you to ask me why?
Exactly.
But to understand and to have spent some time, particularly with stakeholders who maybe don't know what's involved in doing competitive intelligence. And so walking them through their why and getting to all the different ways, maybe easier, faster, cheaper, to address the why, as opposed to the what that they were trying to put on your plate. And that's something that comes with a little bit of time. It takes a lot of nuance in terms of your communication, to be aware that if you're the product marketing person who's asked to do a competitive intelligence project and you're in that role, to know that just coming back and saying why is probably not the best approach there, but to engage in some diplomacy and maybe some positive politics around getting to the why, and over time, and you can do this relatively quickly, establishing that you are accountable to the need behind the why, and then people know that the what is like the beginning of a conversation, and they're willing to go on that journey with you.
I want to talk and perhaps close with that notion of internal politics. You made reference to a term that I love, and I will use this now, called administrative trivia, which is basically like, all right, now I've got this thing, and now everyone's going to ask me questions about it, right? You have, in coordinating your planning processes over the years, you've done your best to avoid having administrative trivia happening, because you're including all of the administrators in the coordination and the planning of everything. So by the time you get to the end, there's going to be, people's hands will be on it, but it won't be muddled. It won't be, everyone trying to make a pie at the same time. It is, everyone is sort of making the pie together. But if you're to talk about that hypothetical straw person, product marketer with a CI mandate, there is a non-zero likelihood that they will have a plan that they will put forth. They may not have included all of the right stakeholders, and then they will be forced to play Jeopardy. And then there will be administrative trivia coming in their direction in all forms. How do you best plan for that? How do you keep your plans subject to scrutiny and able to withstand it once those questions start coming in?
Well, a lot of it comes back to transparency.
Sure.
And that's a little bit trite. So whether it's an individual project or it's a roadmap overall, I do let people see the planning process if they want to go into that level of detail. So we're incredibly transparent in terms of what we're doing, when we're doing it, why we're doing it, those sorts of things. So the criteria we've chosen. I love the administrative trivia model, because if you're aware that that's something that's possibly going to come as the outcome of a project or an annual plan, or even if you're regularly reviewing it, you can build around that. So, for example, in individual projects, I'm fond of saying to my team, the project process is the deliverable. So we're going to engage with the stakeholders throughout the life of the project. We're going to touch with them on particular milestones, and I align those milestones around the intelligence cycle.
And they're going to have access to it the entire time.
Yes.
It'll be shared. It's not like you're building this in a vacuum someplace. They're going to be there every step of the way.
Yes, exactly. So we use Microsoft Teams. There's going to be a team space dedicated to this project. Everybody who's involved in this project is going to be in it. We're going to be giving regular updates to this. It's really great from a competitive intelligence perspective, because sometimes you're brought into these projects, and at the beginning of the project, everybody's like, look at our beautiful baby. This is the most beautiful baby anybody's had. Oh my gosh, this is such a beautiful baby. And you're there looking at it, and you're aware of the competitors' offerings and the trends in the market and where everything's going. And you're like, this is the ugliest damn baby. I'm sorry. and maybe you're not saying it to everybody, but you're thinking it to yourself. I don't think this baby is as cute as everybody seems to think it is. And throughout the life of the project, and you're like, okay, well, alternative competing hypothesis, this is the most beautiful baby in the world, and maybe this is not the most beautiful baby in the world. Throughout the life of the project, you're bringing them along on the different stages. You're talking about how you're going, the data you're going to collect, and how you're going to do the analysis, and how you're going to summarize that, and how you're going to present it. And just quick aside, taking it back to the earlier thing about executives not wanting all that detail, you're probably dealing with people at the middle and the junior level throughout the life of the project as well. So just to be clear, executives are not sticking around for this. They just want to see the result, but you do need members of their team to be brought on this journey with you. So then at the end, you've taken their people along on this process at the end. So you're like, so maybe it's not the cutest baby in the world. And everybody's like, oh my God, it's not a cute baby. We've always known it's not a cute baby. Why are you telling us it's not a cute baby? So when you've done this successfully, everybody kind of has come around to the realistic view, and they're maybe a little frustrated. They feel like you're telling them something that they didn't already know, but at the beginning of the process, they didn't know this. But that's the measure of success.
I could sit and talk with August Jackson for hours, but I wanted to close by finding out what specifically he's planning now, or what CI project he literally just got to the end of.
Well, this week has been a very intense one, because we are preparing for our quarterly sales readout for Q4. Wow. We're just on the end of our sales kickoff, which was incredibly successful, and our marketing team and our events team, our product marketing team, our competitive intelligence team all did a fantastic job delivering all this great sales enablement. And now we're coming into the review with our sales leadership and a couple of other key executives, our marketing leadership and some others. And that's next week. So just sandwiched in between two really intense periods there. And also at the same time, beginning to socialize our plan for 2022 and what our priorities are going to be as well. And we've got 2 or 3 really exciting bespoke projects in hand as well. And I'm not going to talk about the specifics of them, but they're really exciting topics that we're excited. We're on the team. We're really looking forward to getting our hands dirty in some of these competitive situations, and digging into competitors' capabilities and looking beyond competitors' capabilities to see who is best in class in some of these topics as well. Because sometimes this is one of the great things about competitive intelligence, is sometimes you can look beyond your competitor set to see, well, who is best in the world at this? And when you do that, you open up a whole world of possibilities, because if you identify some other provider in the market that you don't compete with directly, who's best in class at that, you can go ask them, hey, how do you do this amazing thing? And people are willing to talk to you and open up. So we've got a couple projects like that where we're going to be talking to some best in class service providers out there.
You know what, August Jackson? You are best in class. You are the best in the world.
Bless your heart. You are best in class.
I cannot thank you enough for chatting with us today. I really appreciate this.
Eric, this has been fantastic. It's always great to talk to you. And thank you for having me along for this conversation.
That's it. That's the ball game. Here's the buzzer, and our time together is up. You want to know who the best in class or best in the world at competitive intelligence is? Look no further than August Jackson from Deltek, who I cannot thank enough for joining me on the podcast. True honor, truly. Personally, I find the idea of planning my CI initiatives to be a daunting task, but with the right people and process in place, it'll go as smoothly as anything else in your product marketing life. Just ask August Jackson. If you've got a competitive intelligence related topic that you want to discuss on a future podcast, just reach out. I'm very active in the PMA Slack team. Look for me in the competitive analysis channel or send me an email at eric@crayon.co. Thanks for listening to the Product Marketing Alliance's podcast, Into the Fray, presented by Crayon. If you liked what you heard, please consider hitting the subscribe button either on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever get your podcasts. I'm Erik Mansur, and until next time, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you get out there and compete like you mean it.